Stories are coming up narrated by me. But first, let's meet the creator. For most, today is a dream come true. Hearts, flowers, chocolates. But for others, that dream turns into a living nightmare. My 5th wedding anniversary falls on Valentine's Day. Most people hear that and say, "Oh, that must be so romantic," or "You're so lucky." I used to think so too. But after what happened last year, I realized luck had nothing to do with it. It all started about 6 weeks before the anniversary. My husband Marcus travels for work medical equipment sales. He's gone 3, sometimes 4 nights a week. We have a nice house in the suburbs of Portland. The kind of neighborhood where people jog with expensive strollers and everyone knows the UPS driver by name. That changed in early January. The Chens, a quiet family who lived 3 houses down, moved out suddenly. One weekend their house was full of life. The next weekend there was a moving truck. Nobody said goodbye. Nobody posted about it on the neighborhood Facebook group. It was just silent. The house sat empty for about 2 weeks. Then one morning, I noticed the lights were on inside. Someone had moved in. I never saw a moving truck, never saw furniture being carried in, but someone was there. I first saw her on a Tuesday morning. I was taking out the recycling when I noticed a woman standing in the Chen's driveway. She was maybe mid-30s, dark hair pulled into a severe ponytail, wearing hospital scrubs. She waved at me. I waved back. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Melissa," she called out. "Just moved in. I'm a night nurse at Providence." "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said, trying to sound friendly. That should have been it. A normal neighbor interaction. But over the next few weeks, I started noticing things. If I was in the backyard hanging laundry, I'd feel eyes on me. I'd look up, and there she'd be, standing at her kitchen window. Not doing dishes, not cooking, just standing there. The moment I'd look, she'd turn away casually, like she'd been looking at something else entirely. Then there were the walks. Melissa worked night shifts, so she was home during the day like me. I'd see her walking past my house. Not just once or twice, but 4, 5 times in an afternoon. Always wearing those scrubs, always with that same tight smile. Marcus thought I was being paranoid. "She's a nurse," he said. "She's probably just trying to get steps in before her shift. Stop being weird about it." But there were 2 incidents that made me realize this wasn't paranoia. The first happened in late January. I was working from home, sitting at my dining room table on a Zoom call. Mid-sentence, I noticed something in my peripheral vision. I turned my head slightly. Melissa was standing on my front lawn, not on the sidewalk on my actual grass, about 10 feet from my window. She was just standing there, perfectly still, looking directly at me. I froze. The person on the Zoom call asked if I was still there. I couldn't speak. I just stared back at Melissa. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 seconds, she turned and walked away. When I checked outside after the call ended, there were footprints in the dew-covered grass. They went from the sidewalk to the spot directly outside my window, then back to the sidewalk. She had walked straight across my lawn just to stand there. The second incident happened 1 week before Valentine's Day. I woke up around 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. Marcus was out of town. As I walked down the dark hallway, I passed the guest bedroom. Something made me stop. The curtains were open. I always keep them closed. I approached the window slowly. From this angle, I had a perfect view of Melissa's house. The light was on in her upstairs bedroom, and she was standing at her window, looking directly at my house. At my window, we locked eyes across the dark space between our homes. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. I grabbed my phone and texted Marcus. "Something's wrong with the neighbor. She's watching the house." He called me immediately. "Are you okay? Do you want me to call the police? And tell them what?" That she looked at me. "Lock everything. I'll be home Friday for the anniversary. We'll figure it out then." I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in the living room with all the lights off, watching her house. Her bedroom lights stayed on until sunrise. Valentine's Day arrived. Marcus came home Thursday night with flowers and a reservation at our favorite restaurant. He assured me we'd deal with the neighbor situation after our anniversary celebration. Friday morning, I woke up before Marcus. I went downstairs to make coffee. On the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker, was a small white box I'd never seen before. It was tied with a red ribbon. My stomach dropped. I knew Marcus hadn't put it there. He was still asleep upstairs. I untied the ribbon with shaking hands. Inside the box, wrapped in tissue paper, was a photograph. It was a picture of Marcus and me. We were sitting at a restaurant table, holding hands, laughing. But I'd never seen this photo before. I didn't recognize the restaurant. I flipped it over. Written on the back in neat handwriting was a date, January 18th. I grabbed my phone and checked my calendar. January 18th was a Tuesday. Marcus had been in Seattle for work. I had been home alone all day. But this photo showed both of us together. I ran upstairs and shook Marcus awake. "When were you home on January 18th? He blinked, confused. "I wasn't. I was in Seattle all week." "Why?" I showed him the photograph. The color drained from his face. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "It was in our kitchen. This morning." We both understood what that meant. Someone had been inside our house. Marcus grabbed his phone and called 911. While we waited for the police, I walked to the front door. It was locked. The back door was locked. Every window was latched. But when the police arrived and checked, they found something. The basement window, the one that's partially hidden by bushes, had been pried open recently. The lock mechanism was bent, though someone had carefully pushed it back into place to make it look normal. The officers asked if we had any suspicions. I told them about Melissa, about the staring, the footprints, the 3 a.m. window incident. They went to her house. I watched from my window as they knocked. Nobody answered. They knocked again. One officer walked around to the back. When they returned, the older officer looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, are you sure someone lives there?" "Yes, I've seen her. Multiple times." We looked in the windows. The house is completely empty. No furniture, no personal items, nothing. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "That's impossible. I've seen lights on. I've talked to her." The younger officer spoke gently. "We checked with the listing agent. The house has been vacant since the Chens moved out. Nobody's rented it or bought it. Whatever you saw, nobody lives there." Marcus and I stood in our driveway after the police left, staring at the empty house. "You talked to her," Marcus said. "I believe you. Then who the hell has been watching us?" We went back inside. Marcus insisted on checking every room, every closet, under every bed. In the guest bedroom, the one where I'd seen Melissa at her window, Marcus found something. Pressed against the inside of the window glass was a small oil smudge, a fingerprint. But it was on the outside of the glass. Someone had been pressing their face against the window from outside, from the second floor. which would have required a ladder. We moved out 3 days later. We're renting an apartment now while we figure out what to do with the house. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. Last week, Marcus was scrolling through his phone and stopped on a photo from our anniversary dinner. The one we had on February 14th, at the restaurant we actually went to. In the background of the photo, barely visible at a corner table, was a woman in hospital scrubs. Dark hair, tight ponytail. She was looking directly at the camera. At us. For a brief period of time, I worked as a substitute teacher in a small town in New Hampshire. Mostly I worked at the elementary level. If you know anything about teaching, you know that substitute teachers are basically invisible. Kids don't take you seriously, other teachers barely acknowledge you, and you're just a warm body, filling a chair until the real teacher comes back. This case didn't fit the usual pattern. I got called in to cover for a third-grade teacher named Mrs. Holloway. The secretary who called me sounded relieved I was available. She said Mrs. Holloway had a family emergency and would be out indefinitely. Now, one thing I've learned in this job is that you should always trust the vibe of a classroom. If the kids are scared, there's usually a reason. Fear is rarely an invention. It's usually just observation that hasn't found its words yet. In Mrs. Holloway's classroom, the kids were terrified. It was mid-February, just after Valentine's Day. I showed up Monday morning expecting the usual chaos of elementary school. Noise, energy, kids testing the new substitute. Instead, I walked into a silent room. 22 third graders sat perfectly still at their desks, hands folded, eyes forward. "Good morning," I said cheerfully. "I'm Mr. Harrison. I'll be your teacher while Mrs. Holloway is away." Nobody responded. Nobody even looked at me. They stared straight ahead like little statues. I spent the first few days following the lesson plan Mrs. Holloway had left. Reading, math, science. The kids did their work without complaint. They didn't talk during class. They didn't ask to go to the bathroom. During recess, they stood in small clusters, whispering, but went silent the moment I approached. The only weird thing I noticed was that Mrs. Holloway's desk was completely empty. No photos, no coffee mug, no teacher supplies. Just a bare desk with a computer and a lamp. On Thursday, a girl named Sophie stayed after class. She was small for third grade, with blonde braids and thick glasses. She approached my desk slowly, clutching a piece of paper. "Mr. Harrison." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes, Sophie. I made you a picture." She handed me the paper and ran out before I could thank her. I looked at the drawing. It showed a classroom with stick-figure children sitting at desks. Standing at the front was a figure in a dress, but the face was scribbled out with black crayon, so violently that it had torn through the paper in places. Written at the bottom in shaky letters, "She's not Mrs. Holloway." I felt a chill run down my spine. I looked up, but Sophie was already gone. That afternoon, I went to the main office. The secretary, Mrs. Chen, was filing papers. "Can I ask you something about Mrs. Holloway?" I said casually. Mrs. Chen's smile faltered. "What about her? How long has she been out?" 2 weeks today. And the family emergency." Mrs. Chen looked uncomfortable. "I really can't discuss personnel matters. I understand. It's just..." The kids seemed really upset. Mrs. Chen leaned in closer and lowered her voice. "Between you and me, nobody's heard from her. She didn't show up one Monday. Didn't call. Nothing. The principal went to her apartment to check on her. Nobody answered. Her car was in the parking lot, but she wasn't there. Did they file a missing persons report?" I don't know. I just know the principal told us to say it was a family emergency if anyone asked. I thanked her and left. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Sophie's drawing. She's not Mrs. Holloway. The next day was Friday. I decided to do something I'd never done before. I broke into Mrs. Holloway's desk. During lunch, while the kids were at the cafeteria, I went through the drawers. Most were empty, but in the bottom drawer, shoved to the very back, I found a journal. The entries were dated. The first one was from September, the beginning of the school year. Mrs. Holloway wrote about her students, her lesson plans, normal teacher stuff. But as the months progressed, the tone changed. In November, she wrote, "There's something wrong with Sophie. She watches me constantly. Not the way children usually watch teachers. It's different. Predatory." In December, Sophie asked me if I live alone. I didn't answer, but she already knows. How does she know? In January, all the children are afraid of Sophie now. They won't tell me why. When I asked them directly, they just shook their heads and looked at the floor. What is happening in my classroom? The final entry was dated February 2nd. Sophie stayed after class today. She told me she knows where I live. She described my apartment perfectly. The green couch, the crack in the bathroom tile, the plant on my windowsill. She's never been to my apartment. I'm going to talk to the principal Monday. There were no more entries after that. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. I looked up at the classroom door. Sophie was standing there, watching me through the window. Our eyes met. She smiled. I grabbed my bag and walked quickly to the principal's office. I told her I was sick and needed to leave immediately. I never went back to that school, but I did check the news obsessively for weeks. There was never any story about Mrs. Holloway. No missing person case, no body found, nothing. About a month later, I got a call from the school district asking if I'd be available for a long-term substitute position at the same elementary school. Mrs. Holloway's position became permanent, the woman on the phone explained. We need someone to finish out the year. What happened to Mrs. Holloway? I asked. She resigned. Effective February. Did she resign in person? There was a pause. The resignation was submitted electronically. I declined the position. The last thing I did was drive past Mrs. Holloway's apartment complex. I don't know why. Morbid curiosity, I guess. Her car was still parked in the same spot the principal had mentioned. It was covered in a thick layer of dust and pollen. It hadn't moved in 6 weeks. I sat in my car, staring at that dusty vehicle, and thought about Sophie's drawing. The violently scribbled face. The words, "She's not Mrs. Holloway." Then, I thought about that electronic resignation. How easy it would be for someone with access to a teacher's computer to send an email. How a third grader, especially a smart one, could sit at a teacher's desk during recess or after school. How nobody would question a child. I started my car and left. Some questions don't have good answers. This happened on Valentine's Day, but honestly, the date didn't really matter. It wasn't about chocolates or cards. It was just a Thursday to me, and a stressful one at that. I was working full-time and going to night classes for my MBA. My schedule was brutal: up at 6, work until 5, class from 6 to 9:30, home by 10. I was exhausted constantly. To save money on parking, I joined a carpool with 3 other people from my office, who also took night classes at the same university. There was Derek, who worked in accounting, Linda, who was in HR, and Vanessa, who I didn't know well but seemed nice enough. She worked on a different floor. Usually, we rotated who drove each week. But that particular week, Derek's car was in the shop, and Linda had called in sick. That left Vanessa. I didn't think much of it when she picked me up that Thursday evening. It was cold, and starting to rain. I was just grateful to have a ride. "Just us tonight," Vanessa said cheerfully as I climbed into her Honda. "Hope you don't mind." "Not at all. Thanks for driving." The first 20 minutes were normal. We talked about work, complained about our professors, the usual commuter small talk. Then Vanessa took an exit I didn't recognize. "Is this a new route?" I asked. "Yeah, there's construction on the main highway. This is faster." I nodded and went back to scrolling through my phone. But after another 10 minutes, I realized we were driving through a completely unfamiliar area. No streetlights, no businesses, just dark rural roads. "Vanessa, where are we?" "Shortcut," she said. Her voice was different now, flat. I checked my phone. No signal. I felt the first flutter of real fear. "I don't think this is the right way. Can you turn around? We're almost there." "Almost where?" "Vanessa, this isn't the way to campus." She didn't answer. She just kept driving, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. I tried the door handle. Locked. The child safety locks were engaged. "Vanessa, unlock the door." "Can't do that." My heart was pounding now. I looked at her face in the dim dashboard light. She was smiling slightly. "What are you doing?" My voice came out as a whisper. "You'll see." We drove for another 5 minutes. Finally, she pulled onto a dirt road and stopped the car in front of an old farmhouse. The windows were dark. The place looked abandoned. Vanessa turned off the engine and pulled the keys from the ignition. She turned to look at me. "My husband is inside," she said calmly. "He's been waiting for you." "What are you talking about?" "I don't know your husband." "Not yet." She got out of the car, taking the keys with her. I frantically pulled at the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. I looked around for something to break the window, my laptop bag, my shoe, anything. That's when I saw the light come on in the farmhouse. A figure appeared in the doorway. A large man, backlit, so I couldn't see his face. Vanessa walked toward him. They spoke for a moment. He started walking toward the car. I did the only thing I could think of. I climbed into the driver's seat and started honking the horn. Long, continuous blasts. Over and over. The man stopped. Vanessa turned back toward the car, her expression annoyed. I kept honking. My hand was slippery with sweat, but I didn't stop. Then, in the distance, I saw headlights. Another car was coming down the dirt road. The man said something to Vanessa. She ran back to the car, yanked open the driver's door, and got in. "Stop it," she hissed. "Stop honking. Unlock my door." I said stop. The other car was getting closer. Vanessa looked panicked. She started the engine and threw the car into reverse. "Unlock my door or I'll jump out of a moving vehicle," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. She unlocked it. I grabbed my bag and threw open the door while the car was still rolling backward. I jumped out, hit the ground hard, and scrambled to my feet. My ankle screamed with pain, but I ran toward the approaching headlights, waving my arms. The car stopped. An elderly man rolled down his window. "Are you all right, miss? Please, I need help. That woman kidnapped me." The man looked past me. Vanessa's car was gone, disappeared down the dark road. The elderly man let me use his phone to call 911. He said he lived in a house about a mile up the road and had heard the honking. He'd come to investigate. The police found Vanessa's car abandoned at a rest stop 30 miles away. They searched the farmhouse. It was owned by a man named Richard Cutler. He wasn't there. Neither was Vanessa. In the basement of that farmhouse, the police found restraints built into the wall, cameras, a mattress on the floor. They also found a folder. Inside were printed photos of women, dozens of them. The photos were clearly taken without the subject's knowledge. Women getting into their cars, women walking into their homes, women at coffee shops. I was in 3 of the photos, leaving my office building, sitting in the carpool, walking across the university parking lot. Richard Cutler and Vanessa Myers were arrested 2 weeks later in North Carolina. Turns out they'd done this before. At least 4 other women had disappeared after carpooling with Vanessa. The FBI found remains on properties in 3 different states. I was lucky. I was lucky because that old man happened to live on that road. I was lucky because I had the stupid instinct to honk the horn. I was lucky because they hadn't prepared for someone to fight back. I don't carpool anymore. I don't care how much parking costs. And every February 14th, I think about those other women. The ones who didn't get lucky. The flowers will fade, but the fear stays. That is the dark side of Valentine's Day. You can get early access to what's coming up next on my Patreon. Hit subscribe if you're brave enough to stick around. Good night.